and the grass ran up the shoulder of the hills, and yet not a solitary ray of light had left the eternal quiver of the sun. Not a blade of grass had ever been touched by a gleam of light, and I do not think that grass will grow to hurt without a gleam of sunshine. I think the man who wrote that simply made a mistake, and is excusable to a certain degree. The next day he made the sun and the moon. The sun to rule the day, and the moon to rule the night. Do you think the man who wrote that knew anything about the size of the sun? I think he thought it was about 3 feet in diameter, because I find in some book that the sun was stopped a whole day to give a general named Joshua time to kill a few more Amalekites. And the moon was stopped also. Now, it seems to me that the sun would give light enough without stopping the moon. But as they were in the stopping business, they did it just for devilment. At another time we read, the sun was turned 10 degrees backward to convince Hezekiah that he was not going to die of a boil. How much easier it would have been to cure the boil! The man who wrote that thought the sun was 2 or 3 feet in diameter, and could be stopped and pulled around like the sun and moon in a theater. Do you know that the sun throws out every second of time as much heat as could be generated by burning 11,000 million tons of coal? I don't believe he knew that, or that he knew the motion of the earth. I don't believe he knew that it was turning on its axis at the rate of 1,000 miles an hour, because if he did he would have understood the immensity of heat that would have been generated by stopping the world. It has been calculated by one of the best mathematicians and astronomers that to stop the world would cause as much heat as it would take to burn a lump of solid coal 3 times as big as the globe. And yet we find in that book that the sun was not only stopped, but turned back 10 degrees, simply to convince a gentleman that he was not going to die of a boil. They will say I will be damned if I do not believe that, and I tell them I will if I do. Then he gives us the history of astronomy, and he gives it to us in 5 words. He made the stars also. He came very near forgetting the stars. Do you believe that the man who wrote that knew that there are stars as much larger than this earth as this earth is larger than the apple which Adam and Eve are said to have eaten? Do you believe that he knew that this world is but a speck in the shining, glittering universe of existence? I would gather from that he made the stars after he got the world done. The telescope, in reading the infinite leaves of the heavens, has ascertained that light travels at the rate of 192,000 miles per second, and it would require millions of years to come from some of the stars to this earth. Yet the beams of those stars mingle in our atmosphere, so that if those distant orbs were fashioned when this world began, we must have been whirling in space not 6,000, but many millions of years. Do you believe the man who wrote that, as a history of astronomy, really knew that this world was but a speck compared with millions of sparkling orbs? I do not. He then proceeds to tell us that God made fish and cattle, and that man and women were created male and female. The first account stops at the 2nd verse of the 2nd chapter. You see, the Bible originally was not divided into chapters. The first Bible that was ever divided into chapters in our language was made in the year of grace 1550. The Bible was originally written in the Hebrew language, and the Hebrew language at that time had no vowels in writing. It was written with consonants and without being divided into chapters or into verses, and there was no system of punctuation whatsoever. After you go home tonight, write an English sentence or two with only consonants close together, and you will find that it will take twice as much inspiration to read it as it did to write it. When the Bible was divided into verses and chapters, the divisions were not always correct, and so the division between the 1st and 2nd chapter of Genesis is not in the right place. The 2nd account of the creation commences at the 3rd verse, and it differs from the 1st in 2 essential points. In the 1st account, man is the last made. In the 2nd, man is made before the beasts. In the first account, man is made male and female. In the second, only a male is made, and there is no intention of making a woman whatever. You will find by reading that second chapter that God tried to palm off on Adam a beast as his helpmeet. Everybody talks about the Bible, and nobody reads it. That is the reason it is so generally believed. I am probably the only man in the United States who has read the Bible through this year. I have wasted that time, but I had a purpose in view. Just read it, and you will find about the 23rd verse that God caused all the animals to walk before Adam in order that he might name them. And the animals came like a menagerie into town, and as Adam looked at all the crawlers, jumpers, and creepers, this God stood by to see what he would call them. After this procession passed, it was pathetically remarked, "Yet was there not found any helpmeet for Adam." Adam didn't see anything that he could fancy, and I am glad he didn't. If he had, there would not have been a free thinker in this world. We should have all died orthodox. And finding Adam was so particular, God had to make him a helpmeet. And having used up the nothing, he was compelled to take part of the man to make the woman with, and he took from the man a rib. How did he get it? And then imagine a God with a bone in his hand and about to start a woman, trying to make up his mind whether to make a blonde or a brunette. Right here, it is only proper that I should warn you of the consequences of laughing at any story in the Bible. When you come to die, your laughing at this story will be a thorn in your pillow. As you look back upon the record of your life, no matter how many men you have wrecked and ruined, and no matter how many women you have deceived and deserted, all that may be forgiven you. But if you recollect that you have laughed at God's book, you will see through the shadows of death the leering looks of fiends and the forked tongues of devils. Let me show you how it will be. For instance, it is the day of judgment. When the man is called up by the recording secretary or whoever does the cross-examining, he says to his soul, "Where are you from?" "I am from the world." "Yes, sir." "What kind of man were you?" "Well, I don't like to talk about myself." "But you have to. What kind of man were you?" "Well, I was a good fellow. I loved my wife. I loved my children. My home was my heaven. My fireside was my paradise. And to sit there and see the lights and shadows falling on the faces of those I love, that to me was a perpetual joy. I never gave one of them a solitary moment of pain. I don't owe $1 in the world, and I left enough to pay my funeral expenses and keep the wolf of want from the door of the house I loved. That is the kind of man I am." "Did you belong to any church?" "I did not. They were too narrow for me. They were always expecting me to be happy simply because somebody else was to be damned." "Well, did you believe that rib story?" "What rib story? You mean that Adam and Eve business?" "No, I did not. To tell you the God's truth, that was a little more than I could swallow." "Tell with him. Next, where are you from?" "I'm from the world, too." "Do you belong to any church?" "Yes, sir, and to the Young Men's Christian Association." "What is your business?" "Cashier in a bank." "Did you ever run off with any money?" "I don't like to tell, sir." "Well, you have to." "Yes, sir, I did." "What kind of a bank did you have?" "A savings bank." "How much did you run off with?" $100,000. "Did you take anything else along with you?" "Yes, sir." "What?" "I took my neighbor's wife." "Did you have a wife and children of your own?" "Yes, sir." "And you deserted them?" "Oh, yes, but such was my confidence in God that I believed he would take care of them." "Have you heard of them since?" "No, sir." "Did you believe that rib story?" "Ah, bless your soul, yes. I believe all of it, sir. I often used to be sorry that there were not harder stories yet in the Bible, so that I could show what my faith could do." "You believed it, did you?" "Yes, with all my heart." "Give him a harp." I simply wanted to show you how important it is to believe these stories. Of all the authors in the world, God hates a critic the worst. Having got this woman done, he brought her to the man, and they started housekeeping, and a few minutes afterwards a snake came through a crack in the fence and commenced to talk with her on the subject of fruit. She was not acquainted in the neighborhood, and she did not know whether snakes talked or not, or whether they knew anything about the apples or not. Well, she was misled, and the husband ate some of those apples and laid it all on his wife. And there is where the mistake was made. God ought to have rubbed him out at once. He might have known that no good could come of starting the world with a man like that. They were turned out. Then the trouble commenced, and people got worse and worse. God, you must recollect, was holding the reins of government, but he did nothing for them. He allowed them to live 669 years without knowing their ABC. He never started a school, not even a Sunday school. He didn't even keep his own boys at home. And the world got worse every day, and finally he concluded to drown them. Yet that same God has the impudence to tell me how to raise my own children. What would you think of a neighbor who had just killed his babes giving you his views on domestic economy? God found that he could do nothing with them, and he said, I will drown them all, except a few. And he picked out a fellow by the name of Noah that had been a bachelor for 500 years. If I had to drown anybody, I would have drowned him. I believe that Noah had then been married something like 100 years. God told him to build a boat, and he built one 500 feet long, 80 or 90 feet broad, and 55 feet high, with one door shutting on the outside, and one window 22 inches square. If Noah had any hobby in the world, it was ventilation. Then into this ark he put a certain number of all the animals in the world. Naturalists have ascertained that at that time there were at least 1,100,000 insects necessary to go into the ark, about 40,000 mammalia, 1,600 reptiles, to say nothing of the mastodon, the elephant, and the animalcule, of which thousands live upon a single leaf, and which cannot be seen by the naked eye. Noah had no microscope, and yet he had to pick them out by pairs. You have no idea the trouble that man had. Some say that the flood was not universal, that it was partial. Why then did God say, I will destroy every living thing beneath the heavens? If it was partial, why did Noah save the birds? An ordinary bird, tending strictly to business, can beat a partial flood. Why did he put the birds in there, the eagles, the vultures, the condors, if it was only a partial flood? And how did he get them in there? Were they inspired to go there, or did he drive them up? Did the polar bear leave his home of ice and start for the tropic, inquiring for Noah? Or could the kangaroo come from Australia unless he was inspired, or somebody was behind him? Then there are animals on this hemisphere, not on that. How did he get them across? And there are some animals which would be very unpleasant in an ark, unless the ventilation was very perfect. When he got the animals in the ark, God shut the door, and Noah pulled down the window. And then it began to rain. And it kept on raining until the water went 29 feet over the highest mountain. Chimborazo, then as now, lifted its head above the clouds, and then as now, there sat the condor. And yet the waters rose and rose over every mountain in the world, 29 feet above the highest peaks, covered with snow and ice. How deep were these waters? About 5.5 miles. How long did it rain? 40 days. How much did it have to rain a day? About 800 feet. How is that for dampness? No wonder they said the windows of the heavens were open. If I had been there, I would have said the whole side of the house was out. How long were they in this ark? A year and 10 days, floating around with no rudder, no sail, nobody